Welcome to our webinar today on Labour's recent employment bill. Today is brought to you by Giant Group, a leading global contingent workforce management company based here in the UK. Just to start off by introducing myself, I'm Betty and I work here at Giant Group as part of the marketing team, especially focusing on our events and webinars. This afternoon, I'm delighted to welcome to you our keynote speakers, Del and Michael, who are going to guide us through this session. Starting with you, Del, could you please introduce yourselves?
Thanks, Betty. Hi, everyone. Warm welcome. Really good to see some familiar names as well, which is great. As Betty said, my name's Del Williams. I'm the UK Agency Sales Director here at Giant. Whilst I'm relatively new to Giant itself, I've been working in the industry for a number of years now, and I've focused all of those 15 plus years in promoting and building relationship management with agency partners. So my role here at Giant is to ensure our partnerships with the recruitment sector is always centric to business strategy and for Giant to remain a leader within the UK market.
Amazing, thanks, Del. And what about you, Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Betty. Hi, everyone. So I'm head of agency sales here at Giant Group. I've probably been working in the industry for probably the same amount of time as Del. It's been a long 15 years, probably feels a lot longer. In the main, navigating businesses through the variety of legislative changes and ensuring compliance and profitability for businesses. I head up our agency sales team to ensure our recruitment partners have the full access to the full range of Giant Group services.
Amazing, thank you so much. So for today's session, we'll focus on the potential changes to UK employment law as signposted by the new Labour government and discuss with Michael and Del how this may impact the contractor workforce in the UK. We expect there to be loads of questions, so please use the Q&A function throughout the session and we'll try and address as many as possible when we get to the end. Without further ado, let's begin to ask you guys some questions. So, Michael, if we can start with you, concerning the potential upcoming changes to the employment bill being considered by the UK government, could you give us a brief overview of what changes you anticipate and how this may affect the market?
Yeah, no problems. Thanks, Betty. Good afternoon, everyone. As Del said, some familiar and new names on today's webinar. Yeah, thanks, Betty. So the pre-election, the Labour Party were very vocal about their desire to radically update the UK's employment laws. The manifesto that the Labour government set out was clearly stated that Britain's outdated employment laws are not fit for the modern economy. They also went on to say that they would propose a new employment bill within 100 days of coming to power. After a number of weeks of speculation, the draft bill was unveiled on October the 10th, 97 days after the election, so they hit the 100-day target. The bill is very lengthy, with over 150 pages, containing 28 employment measures, most of which won't take effect until 2026. It is largely a framework bill, meaning it sets out direction of travel, as there are a number of measures where lengthy consultation will take place to gain feedback from businesses, stakeholders, and measures about how this potential change could impact the market. Before we go into what was in the bill, in terms of anybody on the webinar thinking whether I-35 cropped up in terms of conversations, they've not included this anywhere in regards to the latest employment status bill. In the manifesto, Labour spoke about their intention to simplify employment status down to 2 statuses, rather than the current 3-tiered system we have of today. Effectively, they would like to level up the rights of workers so they are similar to employees and have 2 statuses of worker and self-employed. This is obviously a huge change with big tax and employment law consequences. The government have set out a separate wider reform section in the proposal for this 2-part framework for employment status, so they clearly want to try and drive a change. But this will definitely be subject to a consultation, and we don't expect to hear anything until beyond 2025. So let's look at some of the key points that the government have said that they wish to implement. I think the big one where a lot of people are interested in on today's webinar is the introduction of day one rights for employees subject to a limited probation period. Now, these day one rights include protection against unfair dismissal from day one, although probation periods are allowed, statutory sick pay from day one, parental and bereavement leave from day one, ending 0-hour contracts. We'll talk about this more shortly. The inability to fire and rehire and replace, the right to flexible working where practical, and stronger dismissal protections for pregnant women and new mothers. Interestingly, the day one unfair dismissal right appears only to apply to employees, which suggests that workers, for example, agency workers supplied via recruitment agencies engaged under a typical contract for service, may not have these rights. This may be a further impact on the consultation period required on the review of employment statuses, and so the government decided not to include workers for now, but they may well bring these in later in scope. It is worth noting, however, that agency workers engaged by umbrella companies are usually engaged under a contract of employment. So umbrellas, like Giant, will need to put together some processes to accommodate these new requirements. From the list of additional rights, significant other areas of change around the use of 0-hour contracts. The Employment Bill sets out changes to limit the use of 0 hours worked, along with those on low-hour contracts. For workers who work particularly low hours, unfortunately low is yet to be defined, those workers will have the right to a guaranteed hours contract to reflect their regular hours over a defined period, giving them more security over their earnings. Discussion as to what this defined period should be will continue, with the original proposal suggesting a 12-week period. The bill also allows for people, if they wish to, remain on a 0 hours contract, then they can also continue in this way. The government want to progress with imminent consultations on 0-hour usage, so expect this particular measure to move quickly through Parliament. This could have a wide impact, as many recruitment companies and businesses hire workers on these contracts due to the very flexibility in which they engage their temporary labour. The clauses in the bill specifically relate to, and there are 3 points here, right to guaranteed hours, shifts and the right to reasonable notice, and the right to payment for cancelled, moved or curtailed shifts. So point 1 means that a firm that engages an employee must, after a 12-week reference period, offer the employee a contract with guaranteed hours based on the previously regular worked hours. Clause 2 requires firms to give reasonable notice of a shift required to work and reasonable notice for cancellation. This applies to 0 hours and contracts where the employer must make some work available. An employer must also provide reasonable notice of a cancellation or a change in shift. And lastly, clause 3 requires an employer to pay work each time a qualifying shift is cancelled, moved or curtailed at short notice. So on the face of this, it seems fair changes for workers. However, businesses will need to ensure they have suitable processes in place to ensure they can fall in line with these new rules.
Amazing. Thanks, Michael. Moving on to you now, Del. How do you anticipate the market to react to these proposed changes?
Thanks both of you. From a worker's perspective, I think the government can be congratulated for looking to tackle these issues, right? And I can certainly see the advantages that these proposals will bring to employees across the country. However, from a business perspective, these changes may be viewed of having the potential to stifle the impacts on economy and job creation, which is what the government also campaigned on. So there's obviously a bit of tension there. Consultation will therefore be needed. And more important, they just need to get that balance right. So platforms, staffing companies, other users of 0 hour arrangements face a significant challenge in terms of having to offer regular workers guaranteed hours. Sectors that are likely to be impacted tend to be sort of like the larger number of low-paid workers. So, for example, retail, construction, healthcare, logistics, manufacturing, etc., where these rights to predictable hours, the removal of age-related national minimum wage, and changes such as day one rights will provide a benefit that is not currently costed and necessarily provided for at the moment by the employer. So this will increase costs in the supply chain and may result in workforce reorganisations as employers attempt to control these anticipated employment costs and reconcile the wage bill for their business before these measures come into force. Expect an increased use of outsourcing or increased costs of hiring contractors as additional liabilities are priced in. And this might take some time to filter through, though. I think there's also a general view in the market that what many seek is actual enforcement of the rules, whether they're new coming in or old that are already existing. There's already much legislation in place to protect workers and remove bad practice. However, a lack of enforcement means those who wish to operate compliantly are often at a disadvantage to those who choose not to work within these rules. So on that, the government has announced a new Fair Work Agency. The Fair Work Agency officers will have inspection powers and be able to enforce new penalties for those who breach employee rights, such as holiday pay and national minimum wage. Whistleblowers will also be encouraged to report bad behaviour to this new body. And its powers won't be limited to the new rights. It'll also enforce a current range of current rights, including national minimum wage and certain aspects of the Modern Slavery Act. There is also the additional recruitment of 5,000 HMRC inspectors that was announced a month or so ago, perhaps indicating that this government may actually try to enforce the rules properly and try and change or drive market behaviour towards that compliance. And finally, and more specific to what I or we do here at Giant, I do believe there'll be an increased reliance on payroll providers and other outsourced specialists. As with any change, working together in all aspects of the supply chain is key. So it's important, therefore, that people within this particular audience and webinar look to speak to their suppliers, especially those who offer a broad range of services such as different contract engagement types, salary sacrifice options, etc., within their particular business.
Yeah, thanks, Del. I suppose just following on from that, so I suppose is it fair to say that we may see some form of non-compliance whenever legislative changes have been brought in the past, as this is what we've seen historically?
Yeah, good point. As we know, given the length of time in the industry that me and you have been in, Michael, and obviously people on the call, anytime a legislation change is proposed or implemented, it offers up an opportunity for those that look to gain unfair advantages and try and circumnavigate the changes. So don't be surprised if there's new terminologies that start coming out on the market, new silver bullet services that are marketed out over the short or medium term within the payroll sector. The appetite for providing non-compliance and highly profitable service offerings has always been the unfortunate consequence of any change. But as we all know, it's always very short term, it's super high risk to everyone, and it's just something that people shouldn't engage with.
Thank you both for providing the background on the employment bill changes. Staying with you, Del, what are the potential implications on businesses?
Yep, thanks. You're right to suggest there will be some. Whilst we need to acknowledge that these are just proposed changes, there will be consultation, of course, so it's important to look at the possible impacts. So I've listed a few on my notes here. So Increased compliance costs. I think companies may need to invest in more legal counsel and human resources to ensure compliance with the new regulations, which could, of course, raise operational costs. Then there's changes in employment contracts. So businesses may have to revise the employment contracts to reflect the new rights, such as the extended parental leave or flexible working arrangements that have been proposed. There's going to be an impact on recruitment and retention. So enhanced rights might make jobs more attractive to potential employees, but could also lead to higher expectations, which affecting hiring strategies and retention efforts. Adaptation to flexible work models. If the bill promotes remote or hybrid work, businesses may need to adjust their operations and the culture within that to accommodate these changes. Potential for increased litigation. So there's greater employee rights, which means that there could be more legal disputes, which are prompting businesses to enhance their policies and train up to mitigate those risks. Training and development. So organisations will need to invest, I think, in training programs to educate employees about their new rights and how to navigate them. Also talk to their current internal staff with regards to the impact of it. Then there's the impact on labour relations, i.e. the bill could shift the balance of power in employer-employee relationships, and it potentially lead into increased unionisation efforts or collective bargaining. And then the final point is market competitiveness. So businesses may need to differentiate themselves through improved workplace policies, which could be competitive advantage, but also be a bit of a burden on their resources. So overall, the bill would or could significantly reshape the workplace dynamic. And, businesses will need to come up with proactive measures to adapt effectively.
Amazing. Thank you, Del. Just to remind everyone at this point, thanks to everyone who's already asked a question. Please keep using the Q&A function as we go through the session, and we'll come back to them at the end. And then moving on to you, Michael. What solutions can Giant support businesses with in terms of options and solutions?
Thanks, Betty. I suppose the options and solutions that Giant could support businesses with cover a great and diverse array of angles. And I'll share some topical conversations with businesses I've had with over the last few months in preparation for these employment bill changes. A big focus for businesses, many of whom are on the webinar today, will have a PAYE population of workers, of which currently and historically it doesn't bring much in the way of risk, nor is it a type of engagement that business typically like to have high volume of, especially within the professional sector where contingent workers are typically outsourced in the use of umbrellas, or for those lucky enough to still be outside I-35, they could have their own limited company. Utilising outsourced partners like umbrella companies can obviously bring advantages like commercial, financial and credit benefits, where your PAYE population is pretty much just, I suppose, BAU and part of the expectations. PAYE workers are typically engaged on a contract of services and therefore have, until Labour's employment bill a few days ago, forgone many employment rights, given that their status is a worker, not an employee. Excuse me. With the new Labour government looking at streamlining statuses to be either employed or self-employed, additional layer of risks and costs for PA workers is something businesses should be very mindful of, and the use of the consultation period, likely to be in 2025, to get properly planned for the changes that are likely to come in place in 2026. Many agencies have the option of a PAYE engagement due to the workers maybe wanting a range of payroll models and not wanting to engage with an umbrella company or a limited company. However, over the coming months and years ahead, we are likely to see a number of businesses look at outsourcing this solution to alleviate the many additional costs and risks this new employment bill is likely to bring. Giant Group have provided outsourced payroll to a number of businesses for the best part of 15 years. Now, this is something completely outside of our umbrella solution. And while a number of companies will look at bringing new offerings to their range of services with untested and unproven experience, Giant are well versed in diversifying into this outsourced PAYE service, giving businesses confidence that we are a key strategic partner to help your business deal with yet further legislative changes. Many businesses on today's webinar clearly understand the risks, but with any changes we have seen over the years, it leads to opportunities. And for those businesses who have partnered with companies like Giant who offer a wide range of solutions, will have a successful proven track record.
I think to add to that, Michael, given the potential complexities that are coming along with these changes, I think it's important to showcase the size and financial stability of the Giant Group. So this should be something that I think most businesses should be mindful of when they consider outsourcing. So a couple of questions like, which umbrella providers have been there and done it, I guess. So, historically, lots and lots of changes coming in. People like Giant and other long-standing umbrella companies have kind of been there and seen it and got the T-shirt in the sense of how to, deal with these particular changes. Who can naturally or easily compared to others absorb the resource needed to support the change. So, it's going to cost every organisation some form of money in the sense of changing particular parts of their business and processes. Do your partners afford that and can they actually sort of, account for it? So whilst there'll be a lot of payroll companies suggesting that any impact of the proposals will be easily managed by them, we do know that it tends to be the larger and more established umbrella companies and payroll providers that tend to adapt quite quickly. So it's just probably worth pointing that out.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for sharing your insights so far. I know I've learned a lot about the intricacies that come with the employment bill. And so I really hope that everyone has found this session useful. I think the key takeaways are that it's clear that the legislation continues to evolve, as well as the fact that we're going to have to understand HMRC's approach to enforcement and where they are focusing their resources currently. We've had a few questions, so we're going to make our way through those now. So to begin with, someone said they're an ad hoc agency. They don't have the ability to offer 0-hour contracts. So what will happen there? Is that allowed, or how will they have to move forward?
I'll pick that one up, Betty. I suppose we'd have to understand the situation a little bit more in terms of what options these workers have got. I mean, these workers are typically, if they're not on 0-hour contracts, they're either usually on a contract for services or they're on a contract of employment. So I'm not so sure there'll be too much of an impact for that particular business, but more than happy to take that offline with Del or I to have a chat through the options and potential avenues to explore.
Amazing, thank you so much. And then we've got someone who's saying that holiday pay is calculated on the employee's AWR status. Did the employment bill bring any changes to do with that at all?
But again, I think the devil will be in the detail, as I said to Michael, was a bit of a throwaway line from someone else that is in this industry. But with the agency workers regulations, there are obviously connections to the employment rights bill. Okay, but it's just going to go down to what is defined under the employment rights bill with regards to typical type of worker. But the AWR looks at things such as day one rights and rights after a 12-week period, etc., etc. So there will definitely be some nuances that are linked. Potential changes that will come in. But I think the day one rights that Michael has gone through towards the beginning of the webinar is something that we should certainly look at. and we should certainly understand, because that's the closest that will have that knock-on effect, in my opinion.
Amazing, thank you. And then this also might be something that comes further down the line when there are more details, but currently in the Q&A, we've got lots of people who are asking about the nuances surrounding these zero-hour contracts, kind of what would define an exploitative contract? Are there going to be boundaries surrounding these things? Is this going to mean that companies then have loads and loads of people on their books that they don't need? Like, has there been any guidance, or can you guys provide any at this point, or is this something that we're going to have to wait on?
I think I'll pick that one up, Betty. I think for me, I think reading through the detail in terms of the employment bill, it said that, we understand that what this government doesn't want to do is exploit workers. And for those workers that have regular work, and for those workers that have that a natural pattern of work, the employer should therefore then be able to provide that person with a specific contract based on the work that's being carried out. That's not to say that those workers who want a 0 hours contract, who may be fully employed and do sort of Uber Eats or Deliveroo, for example, on a 0 hours contract, that they're able to still retain that sort of status as a 0 hour contract. So I think it's about making sure that the balance is fair. That goes back to Dell's point in his sort of topic area, Betty, is that this government are trying to be fair and balance the worker and the employer engagement. So I think, we'll have to wait throughout the consultation, which is obviously going to be starting imminently and throughout 2025. But I think for those workers that do have a regular working pattern, I think the government are backing them and championing them to say that they should be offered a contract to match the work that's being delivered. And for those that don't want that sort of specific contract, they can also choose to remain on a 0 hours contract. So it gives that flexibility, but I think it also makes sure that this government are here to make a change, and to make a change very quickly.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We've just had a question in the chat, which is, what would you guys say is the best approach for a recruitment agency or a consultant to support clients with these new proposed regulations?
I'll pick that up, Michael. So I think just by doing this for a long time, there's always something that changes in our world, right? And going back to IR35, public sector changes, or if you have, new legislation coming in, AWR, et cetera, I would always urge communication with everyone that's in that supply chain. So speaking to end clients as early as possible, speaking to the rest of your team, speaking to your service partners or your trusted partners, or however it looks. A lot of people on here will be members of other accreditation and membership sites such as APSCO and any other kind of similar accreditation. I think it's always important to engage and to speak and to find out what that particular impact is going to have to, first of all, your business, and be quite honest with everyone else within that supply chain. But also, more importantly, understand where that end client sits and what other avenues that particular client is looking at, and how they're going to cope with it. But education is definitely the key. Understanding the fact that we're in a consultation period, so nothing has actually changed today, is also important. Getting yourself set and ready for any potential changes is always obviously best advice. But I think it was, on that chat with regards to, what you should do today, probably just start engaging and talking. And as a salesperson, like today, for instance, opportunity to get out in front of more people. So you could potentially use it as an opportunity to engage a little bit more directly with your end clients and start discussing this in order to just be that valuable partner if and when these changes come in.
Amazing. Thanks, Del. A few people have asked about, again, I think there's a lot of interest towards the 0 hours contract style of work, because obviously, lots of people are engaged in that, or their businesses are. Lots of people have asked quite specifically about, for example, like NHS work or working with care homes and things like this, where actually the pressure for the 0 hours contract comes from the nature of the work itself. Are there going to be any exceptions? Can we comment on that at all?
think it's a tough one. I think clearly they've set out quite a lot of changes. They want to sort of ensure that they are seen to be different than the previous government in terms of how they deal with tax statuses. And going back to Dell's point, I think it's a case of everybody on this webinar, everybody in the industry, when the consultation period arrives and you get asked to submit your thoughts and views in terms of how this would impact your industry, please make sure you take the chance to do so, because if there's only one voice or there's only a handful of people that engage with the government on this, they will just continue with what they've proposed. It's so important that people on this webinar and industry bodies, FCSA, REC, APSCO, also have a voice as well, because this will sort of shape the industry for the next number of years moving forward. So in terms of specifics, I think it's just a case of making sure that you are sharing your experience within the industry, and especially when it comes to the NHS, we understand the demand and the pressures within that sector, but it's important that these workers are not exploited and they're not paid for things that they do or they don't do. So it's just a case of making sure that we wait for the detail to come out after the consultation.
Amazing, thanks, Michael. And someone's just said, what would you recommend agencies to be doing now in preparation for these upcoming changes? Do you recommend any changes to current operational or compliance tasks?
I personally wouldn't go too far into changing absolutely everything and having this massive dynamic shift within your sort of like working arrangements or your understanding of it. I would just potentially, depending on the size of your organisation, maybe champion a particular stakeholder within the organisation to really own the understanding and the education aspects of this change, so they could filter that through the rest of the organisation. Again, because I'm a lazy sales guy, I would always look to outsource, getting some knowledge. So, use partners like your umbrella partners and your payroll suppliers or other areas that can obviously give you some form of content. Go onto lots of different webinars, go onto lots of different seminars if we do face-to-face stuff, to really educate yourself. But today, I would just understand what the potential impact is. And then I would start gradually looking at potentially in 2025 how to work out how that's going to make a big implementation or change to your organisation. Because if you do something today, I just wouldn't do that before Christmas. I would start looking at it next year.
Amazing, thanks, Del. And I think lots of the questions we've got also are quite specific to some people's business or their line of work. So what I will say is that we will follow up with people individually after the session, and also I'll send out the recording tomorrow with the details if you want to contact Del or Michael individually. They're here to help you, and so are the rest of our giant team of experts. So we just wanted to say a huge thank you from us for joining this